Good morning, and I really want to thank the organizers of this symposium for inviting me to participate. I've really enjoyed the presentations, and I really feel privileged to be a part of this. Okay, I'm going to start my presentation with an observation that I don't think will surprise anybody in this room, and that is that African Americans are disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS. While they comprise around 12 to 13% of the population, 14% of all AIDS cases reported in the United States are in African Americans, 49% of new HIV diagnoses, and this is likely to continue given that 61% of all HIV diagnoses in people under 25 are in African Americans. And we might typically think about explaining these in sort of the health literature. Often these kinds of differences would be explained in terms of individual behaviors. But the literature just doesn't support this. African Americans do not use drugs any more frequently than do whites. And when they do, they report actually less risky drug use behavior. And condom use patterns do not seem to fit, differences in condom use do not match these extraordinary disparities. So it's important instead to start thinking about these kinds of differences, inequities in HIV in terms of more structural explanations and focus on more social contextual factors that determine health. And what I would argue is that one of the most important features of our, and I don't think anybody would disagree, of our social context right now, one of the most important manifestations of race, class, and gender oppression currently is this massive incarceration and the related involuntary movement between the prisons and jails and the community. And we have to look at how this impacts on HIV risk. And I don't need to repeat these numbers indicating the extent of this disparity, race disparity, or in incarceration. How does incarceration produce HIV, AIDS? There is some indication that there may be some risk going on within the prison. There's not as much sex or drug use going on in the prison. It does go on in the prison, and when it does, it's undoubtedly more risky. But it's hard to get too much data on what's happening and how this might be associated with HIV. But I'm more interested really in how the risk that's associated with this constant movement back and forth between prisons and jails and the community. And in particular, three facets of this I'll focus on for this presentation, which are the way in which relationships are made unstable, the disruption of stable relationships that this produces, the multiple and concurrent partnerships that it can lead to, and this oftentimes happens through the removal of so many, particularly men, from communities. So there's communities where I did this research in New Haven where fully 2/3 of the men are missing from their communities and are in prison or jail, and then related condom use behaviors. So I'm pulling from research that I did while I was in New Haven that was supported by NIDA. We call it SHARP, Project SHARP, Structures, Health, and Risk Among Probationers and Parolees. It's a multi-method study that had the larger goal of understanding how incarceration and probation and parole impact on the HIV-related risks of people with a history of drug use and how these vary by race and gender. And we did longitudinal semi-structured interviews with 48 people. These were about 2-hour interviews. We did at baseline and 6 months and then a year follow-up. And then we did a small cross-sectional survey with 130 people that we asked about, among tons of stuff, but among other things, their sexual partnering, both in the 30 days before their most recent incarceration and in the period after their incarceration. And then we did also do some interviews with criminal justice personnel to try to understand a little more of that system. So I'm going to present some preliminary data analysis from these. First, some just basic characteristics of the population. You can see that about half of the men and 40% of the women were under 40. It's largely African-American population, and that's pretty similar for both men and women. It's a fairly uneducated population, so about 3/4 of the population of women and 80% of men had a high school education or less, and it's not one that has a large experience with marriage. About 2/3 of the men and about a little over half of the women had never been married. Probably some of that difference is because of the age difference. The women were slightly older than the men. It's also, this group, by definition, is drug using, because in order to get into the study, they had to have had drug-related, nonviolent drug-related offense, and so most of those people were also drug users and had some family history of illegal drug use as well. And in terms of their prison history, it was a population that had moved in and out. Most of them had been incarcerated. The vast majority had been incarcerated more than once, and some of them had been incarcerated up to 16 times or more. Mostly, as I said, for drug-related charges, and there is a family history, though less for women than for men, of incarceration. This just shows you at the most recent incarceration how long that was. And most of the most recent, the majority were incarcerated for a year or less, but there were some who were incarcerated for much longer periods of time. So the first set of questions we asked that I'm presenting related to this were the first time you left, after you left your prison, the most recent time, how soon was it before you had sex? And who did you have sex with? And for the men, 1/3 of the men had sex within the first 24 hours of their release, whereas the women, it was much lower. But most of them had had sex within the first month of release. And the other thing that's striking about this is most of them are having sex this first time that they had sex with somebody they already know. A very small number are having sex with someone that they just met. Then we asked about the condom use the first time that they were released, and this is the data for the men. Overall, condom use is 46% use condoms, but that varies in terms of the type of partnership. So for non-committed partners, there was higher rates of condom use than for people they considered to be in a committed partner relationship. And that's pretty typical of what we see with condom use behaviors. It's higher with people that are non-committed partners than committed. And similarly, the women have higher rates of condom use on their first sex after release, but it also varies by partnership type. So in terms of these three factors that I said I would emphasize, the first I'll say ahead of time, incarceration appears to contribute to relationship instability among this group of people, though it seems to be a little more true for men than for women. And why do I say this? First, this shows, so 59% of the sample said that they had a sexual partner, of men, said that they had a sexual partner in the 30 days before their most recent incarceration. 38% of them said they had that same, at least one of those same sexual partners after incarceration, and 20% had new partners. For women, the difference is not as large. 44% of the sample said that they had sexual partners in the 30 days before the most recent incarceration. 40% continued to have sex with at least one of those partners afterwards, and 40% had new partners as well. Then we asked, was incarceration associated, or did incarceration lead to the breakup of your marriage? And we asked this about and also about to the breakup of a committed relationship. And we asked this about their first incarceration, and 13% of women and 38% of men indicated, yes, that my first incarceration led to the breakup of my marriage, and a much larger percent said that it led to the breakup of their committed relationships. And then we also asked that about their most recent incarceration, and again, is actually the more recent incarceration, which was probably, given that they'd been circulating in and out, probably after more than one incarceration, was even more likely to lead to the breakup of a marriage. And for both men and women, and somewhat less likely than the first incarceration for committed relationships, but still they're attributing incarceration to the breakup of their relationships. So the second thing that I said was concurrency may be another route through which incarceration impacts on.
Can you speak right into the microphone?
So concurrency in this work also in this group of in this sample appears to be relatively high overall, For men, it seemed to have declined slightly, but for women, it seemed to increase after incarceration. So these are respondents who were reporting sexual partners in addition to their committed partners before and after incarceration for men. So 32% of men said that they had both a committed partner in the 30 days before their most recent incarceration as well as other sexual partners. And they said after as well that they had 32. This is just coincidental. It wouldn't have to be the same, but it just turns out that it is the same number of men reporting concurrency after as before. And so one of the ways that this happens, and we did these qualitative interviews, and so I want to pull at least a little bit from those as well. This is a person explaining this. Yes, I have intentions on getting back with her, meaning my wife. And this right here with this girlfriend, it's like a thing where I just came out and I needed a residence. And residence with my wife is public housing, and it doesn't allow convicted felons to be in there. I'm in the process of moving her, my wife, out of there to get a place that I can live with her again. So he's explaining why, now his wife, she visited him every week in prison. You know, there was a strong commitment to him. But he's explaining when he left, he couldn't move in with his wife, and so he had to find another place to live. And most of our people, if I was giving a different presentation, I'd talk about how everybody goes to live with women, because women are the ones, if everybody except for women, who don't really have as many options for whom to live with. But so this man goes to find somebody else he can live with because he can't live with his wife, so he goes with another girlfriend. He's having sex with both of these people, unprotected sex with both of these people, and this system is producing this concurrency where he would prefer to be living with his wife. And then you can imagine also that in order to live with him, he's got to take her she's got to leave public housing. That makes her life more unstable, potentially, you know, if he leaves her or whatever, because she won't have access to she won't have public housing if she leaves. So this is for the women, respondents in the 30 days prior to incarceration, no woman said that she had both a committed partner and an additional partner. But after incarceration, 40% of the women said that they had an additional partner, at least one additional sex partner in addition to the committed partner. And this is just another representation showing the increase in concurrency. And then finally, with respect to condom use, in general, I'll just summarize first and then present some of the pieces of the evidence. Condom use is relatively low in this sample overall. For men, condom use appears to stay about the same with committed partners and to go down with non-committed partners after incarceration, even though respondents suspect that their partners have had other sexual partners while they were incarcerated. For women, we just didn't have enough data to really look at it in detail, but it seems like there might be a slight increase in condom use after incarceration. So this is the example of men, and this is their reporting of their condom use behavior with committed partners that they had before incarceration and then continued. So these are committed partnerships that survived the incarceration, basically. And we asked, did you how frequently do you use condoms? And you can see very, very low, only 16% using condoms always, both before and after incarceration with their committed partners. And if we expand that a little more to make a little less rigid definition, then usually or always it slightly increases the number who would report that they use condoms with their committed partners after incarceration as opposed to before. But here you can see that they were asked before your incarceration, did you think that how likely was it that your committed partner was having a relationship with someone else? And 15% said it was like probably they were. But then we asked during your incarceration, how likely was it? 55% said they probably were, but they still haven't really changed their condom use behaviors. And what they tell us in the qualitative interviews is it's very hard to introduce condom use into a relationship that when you left for prison, you were not using condoms. You go back into that relationship. If you introduce condom use, you're either saying, I was doing something that I need to protect you from, or you were doing something that you need to protect me, and questioning the relationship and the trust in the relationship. And this is just one of our respondents explaining this. Why do you choose not to use condoms? It doesn't feel the same. What about when you first met her, like back in 2000? Yeah, we did the first month, that's about it. And then I got incarcerated for the 3 years, and I didn't even think about it when I came out. So do you have any concerns when you're in jail that she might not be faithful to you, or there might be, oh yeah, it crosses my mind, but I can't dwell on it. If she's going to do something, she's going to do it. She can just come, oh baby, I've been so faithful, and I would take her word for it, So he doesn't even want to question the possibility, even though, there's substantial suspicion that that might have happened. And these are for non-committed partnerships. So these are 27% of the men said that they, in non-committed partnerships before incarceration, they always use condoms. It goes way down when they pick up. These are non-committed relationships that survive incarceration. Their condom use goes down actually after incarceration. And even if we expand the definition of condom use, it still goes down after incarceration. And this is another way of demonstrating that as well, looking sort of as an average. For women, we couldn't look in such a detail. We could only just look across the averages. There seems to be a somewhat slight increase in condom use. Whoops. So what's going on? This finding of going down in non-committed relationships after incarceration seems counterintuitive, because these are relationships, there was no commitment, there was no sense of trust, supposedly, or establishment of that kind of issue in these relationships prior to. But when they come out of prison, they're actually reducing their condom use with these partners. So one possibility is that post-incarceration, respondents are seeking to establish stable relationships or demonstrate the stability of existing relationships, stability that is undermined by the criminal justice system or that is jeopardized due to their criminal justice involvement. And non-condom use is indicative of this desire, even if it's putting them at risk for HIV. So two pieces, and then I'll end on this story. Trust, in general, the two reasons most people give for using or not using condoms has to do with trust. Trust is a major reason given for non-condom use, and trust is a sign of a stable relationship. So, this woman saying, I don't have concerns about sexually transmitted diseases, none. I trust him, we've been walking out of town, and I know a girl's pretty, we'll walk past him. M doesn't turn his head, and I'm saying if he does that when I'm with him, and then when my cousin tells me they see him and M still acts the same way, you don't know how I'm feeling, but they know him and he's still acting the same way like when I'm with him, I trust him completely. Conversely, when somebody explains the difference between why they always use condoms with their girlfriend and why they don't use with others, this respondent says, it was like if I was messing with other females, I won't mess with the same over and over again. It's like every day I had a different female. I meet a female in the street that day, that's who I'm going to be with that day. You want to chill with me today. So basically he's saying, I use condoms with those women that I see, I don't have an ongoing relationship with them, but I never use them with my regular partner. So these unstable relationships, I use condoms, and in my more stable relationships, I don't. And then finally, the second most important reason people give for using condoms is contraception. And either they're using them to protect themselves, either women, or to protect from having children or to have children. And after incarceration, men indicate that they stop using condoms because they want to have a baby with a woman. They want to establish they don't necessarily say, I want to establish a more long-term relationship, but they say, I want to have a baby with this woman. I'm ready to be a man. I'm ready to settle down. And so he says, no, I don't use condoms with this woman. I only have one daughter, that's why. So he's saying, I want to have more kids. I only have one. When my baby mother, I was infatuated with her I was young, I wouldn't have it. If I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have my daughter at that time because I wasn't ready for no child, I just starting to become a man, At least I can say I'm a man today. Before I said I was a man, I wasn't. I was just an adult, just the age, So, there's lots of caveats. This is a small sample of probationers of parolees in New Haven. The analysis is based on, preliminary analysis of cross-sectional survey data. But it is suggestive that there's a reason to argue that this massive incarceration is associated with HIV-related risk. I would just, those bullet points simply repeat the major points. But the point is, the extraordinary health consequences of massive incarceration, which manifest themselves in, among other things, substantial race differences in HIV/AIDS, represent not a problem of individual behavior, but yet another problem of punishment. And if we really want to deal with HIV, then we need to deal with this problem of punishment as well.